All right. Since I'm going to be gone Sunday, I wanted to give you as many different things today as possible. So, for Sunday school, we kind of did a modified word study on the word vain. We did not complete it, and we need to complete it. And I will definitely try to get back to that. Sunday morning, we worked on Romans 3, which we'll continue to do that on Sunday mornings. But I know there's a couple things we're working on. We're working on the difference between exegesis and eisegesis, right? We made a little. We got kind of far into that, and then there's been new developments that we can add to that discussion. So we need to complete that. We're also looking at the section in the Catholic Catechism on hermeneutics, their method of hermeneutics. We need to complete that. But what I wanted to do tonight, instead of just going to something that we're already working on and trying to complete it, or adding to or working out what we did this morning, to give you something additional, and then between Monday and Thursday, then what I may do is come up here and then work on some of those things to complete them in a recording, and then you'll have those, and then whatever Stephen does on Sunday, so you'll have plenty of things to. I'll make sure you have plenty of things to listen to if you need them. So we'll do something a little bit different tonight, but we'll borrow from what we did during Sunday school. What we did in Sunday school is we started looking at the word vain, correct? And then we started basically using a modified word study to try to figure out what the New Testament has to say about the word vain, correct? And we learned about that we can be vain in our giving. We can be vain, and when we say vain, it can be empty or meaningless. So a better way to put it, our giving can be vain, meaningless, or empty. Our praying can be vain, empty, or meaningless, and our worship can be that way. And there's a lot more that we could work on. But this is what I want to do. I want to step back, and I'll be teaching this again on the VBC Bible Institute podcast after I finish Psalm 119. I got one more message to do, and I'll be done with that. I'll be teaching the methods of Bible study again. But I thought tonight, since we kind of are already in the middle of a word study, we'll step back tonight. And I'll teach you how to do a word study, and we'll go through the method, and we'll try to break down how to do a word study, and hopefully it'll be beneficial since we're already in the middle of doing one. Does that make sense? And it'll give you something different to look at. All right, so the idea of a word study. When you do a word study, what do you think the goal is of a word study? All right, discover the meanings of a word. Right? Discover the meaning of the word. And you can understand why this would be an important method of Bible study, right? If you have a Bible, you can probably look at it, and what are you going to see? Words, right? And the meaning of those words are going to help determine the meaning of the word, and the meaning of the words determine the meaning of the verses, and the meaning of the verses help you determine the meaning of the chapter, and the meaning of the chapter helps you determine the meaning of the book, right? Does that kind of make sense? But you start with the words, all right? So, I think this is important. In fact, let me pull this up here. All right. Here we go. So I think we got a basic idea, so let's kind of break this down and remind ourselves of a couple of things. The Bible obviously was originally written in what three languages? Hebrew, Greek, Aramaic, right? Hebrew, Greek, and Aramaic. Most of it is in what? Hebrew and Greek. Okay. Now, even though the average Christian, you're not trained in Hebrew or Greek, because of all of the availability of the tools that we have today, any person who's interested in doing a personal Bible study can access the information about Hebrew and Greek to be able to do a word study. Anybody has the ability to do that in 2020. A teenager can do it, an adult can do it, anybody can do it. All they have to do is have the right tools, use the right tools, put forth a little bit of effort, and there should be no excuse for why they can't accomplish a basic word study. And well, we can go into a lot more there, but you get the basic idea, all right? So we can pull that off. Again, and it's important to remember, there was a time that the only people who could do a word study were people who knew Greek and Hebrew, There was a time that the average Christian couldn't. Now the average Christian can. Now the problem is we can, but the average Christian now won't. Okay? So that's the most frustrating thing. In other words, the average Christian today should know far more than the average Christian in the past. And I will argue that that's not the case. And I don't know why the average Christian isn't more bothered by that, because that brings lots of conviction and shame, because they didn't have what you have. I mean, you literally have in the palm of your hands, on your phone, the ability to do what Christians, they couldn't even have dreamed of, wouldn't even imagine that it was ever be possible. And yet, go to the average Christian, ask them 5 questions today, and they'll look at you like, what are you talking about? And you could have gone back then, and they would have been like, oh, boom, 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 boom. And like, well, how do you know it? It's something went horribly wrong. And we can tell what went horribly wrong. Motivation and desire, that's what went wrong, because clearly they didn't have the ability and yet learned in spite of what not having the ability. You have the ability, and if you don't know, it's because you don't want to. It's the desire, right? So let's get a definition of the word study method, right? There's kind of a little bit of background and challenge there, right? Definition. The word study method of Bible study takes a microscopic look at the origin, definition, occurrences, and uses of a particular word. All right? So the word study method of Bible study takes a what? Microscopic look, right, at the origin, definition, occurrences, and uses of a particular word, especially as it relates to the context of a passage of Scripture. So simply put, what are you doing in a word study? You're taking a microscopic look. What does that mean? You're zooming in, right? Zooming in on one word. And you're looking for its origin, its definition, and its occurrences and uses of a particular word, especially as it relates to the context of a passage of Scripture. Right? Does that make sense? Microscopic look, origin, definition, occurrence, and uses of a particular word. Everybody got that? What is the purpose? The purpose is to learn as precisely and comprehensively as possible what the biblical writer meant by the word he used. All right? What is the purpose? To learn as precisely and comprehensively as possible what the biblical writer meant by the word he used. When I'm reading a passage of Scripture and it talks about vain, well, why do they use the word vain? Well, I need to know the origin, the use, right, of that word. Correct? Okay. Someone put it this way. Just as a great door swings on a small hinge, so the important theological statements of the Bible often depend upon even the smallest words. Right? A door swings on a hinge, a small hinge, and the Bible theological statements, it's small words. Like what word were we focusing on this morning, if you think about during the Roman study? Justification. Right? That's a major theological concept, and it comes down to the meaning of one word, justification. And then what was the other word we talked about during this sermon? Propitiation, right. Yeah, I'm talking from the Roman study. Propitiation, that's an important word. Right? It's an important word. So that's very important, all right? Most of the great doctrines of the Word of God revolve around a single word, such as grace, atonement, or faith. Now, a lot of people think they know the meaning of grace or atonement or faith, and they think they know because they listened to a sermon and someone said, here's the definition of atonement, and they're like, oh, okay, that's the definition. But have they actually done an actual word study on the meaning of the word? And that's why sometimes, again, almost all disagreements and all arguments in Christianity, they're what kind of arguments? Hermeneutical arguments, right? That's what they are. And so before you start debating and arguing, you have to stop and go, okay, we're arguing over justification. did you do a word study? And if they say, don't argue. There's no point in arguing. How can they argue if they've not even done a word study? And I say that a lot of time to you guys. Don't argue with me unless you've done the study, because how can I argue with you, right? I'm sitting here going, okay, I studied this, read this, and you're arguing with me, and you're not even listening. Well, at that point, you believe that you don't even have to have knowledge in order to argue. The arguing has to be on equal level of knowledge. So then, because guess what? If we have an equal level of knowledge, what usually happens? That limits the things we can disagree on, right? Okay? So that means, okay, you've seen this, I've seen it. Okay, these are the few things. But if you don't even have the right starting point, you'll never get anywhere. So the meaning of words are absolutely critical, and we have to understand this. In order to understand the deeper meaning of Scripture, we must study the specific words that were used. Everybody agree with that? Have a deeper understanding of Scripture. What must you study? The specific words that were used. All right. Correct interpretation of biblical truth depends on the correct understanding of the words used. Everybody got that? Correct interpretation of the Bible depends on what? On the correct understanding of words used. Correct interpretation depends on correct understanding of words. You have to understand the words used. This is true of anything, right? If you don't understand the words that you read in a book, can you come up with a correct understanding of it? No. That's what happens a lot of times when people pick up Shakespeare. You're like, what? Because he's using words that you're not familiar with. So you have to stop and go, what did the words mean? Once you figure out what the words mean, then you go back and go, oh, this is what he was saying. Same thing with the Scriptures, all right? Okay? And we could look up a lot of verses here about the words, but I think you get the idea, all right? Okay, now, what makes it difficult? Okay, so we get this idea that we're doing a word study and that we can't get correct understanding that we're doing a word. We understand that the definition of this method is to really do a microscopic look at the origins, definitions, usage, right? We get that. We understand what we're trying to accomplish. We're trying to understand the meaning of the word, and because that can help us understand why the writer used that specific word. I think we all understand all of that, correct? Now, what's the difficulty? Why is it so difficult in understanding the words of the Bible? Because the original words were written in a different language. The original words were written in a different language. What are we using? A translation, all right? And sometimes when you're using a translation, it can be we have to get from the translation to what the original was saying, because sometimes a word in a translation does not capture the full meaning. Does that make sense? Okay? All right, and I think and here's the reason why, because no two languages correspond exactly. No two languages correspond exactly. There's just no way for it to happen. If someone says something in Greek and then I try to bring it over to English, it's not they don't correspond directly. There's a lot going on into that. Everybody got that? Oh yeah, it would be all broken and not make any sense. Word equivalents do not always exist between languages. What does that mean? They use this word in Greek, and we don't have an equivalent in English. So then what do we do? What do translators do? They may take a word and make it a phrase. Right? Or they sometimes have to choose. They're like, okay, well, we don't really have a word for that. So we have to kind of come up with a lot of, all right, well, we'll try this. And then sometimes that Greek word could have 5 different meanings. And you're like, well, which meaning do we pick? There's a lot of things that you have to work on to make this happen, all right? So in studying the Bible, we have to be willing to search out the full meaning of a word that the translators that the translators used and try to figure out what they were pulling from. Bottom line is we have to be willing to try to figure out what the word means, what word is used, and how we understand it. I mean, I think that's very important, all right? Consider this, all right? The original text of the Bible, all right, was translated into English, and some 6,000 different words were used. All right? Some 6,000 different words were used, okay? Whereas in the Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek original, right? If we take now when they say original, obviously we don't have the originals, but if we look at the manuscripts, we're looking at somewhere around 11,280 words. So, how do you fit 11,000 words into 6,000? So in the manuscripts, you have 11,000. You bring it into the English Bible, you have around 6,000. So that's a whole lot of words. Now, so what do you have to do to make that work? This is what happens. By translating several different original language words into one English word. All right? For example, in the New Testament, the English word servant translates 7 different Greek words. 7 different Greek words. That's how come sometimes in a concordance, right? If you ever pay attention to this, you can see this in a Strong's Concordance, or if you're on your mobile device, you'll look like you could look up the word vein, right? And then you'll say it'll like in the Strong's Concordance, if you look up vein, it'll show you every verse that has the word vein in it, right? And over the side it has those numbers, right? And you'll be like, one will be 6,320, and the next one will be 6,456. What does that tell you? Different Greek words, unless if we're looking at the Old Testament Hebrew, right? It's different Greek words. Well, why? Well, they took different Greek words and translated it into one English word. So what do you have to do? Figure out what's the difference in the definitions, because that may change the way I understand that word, which then may impact how I understand the verse, which may impact how I understand the chapter, which could ultimately influence how I understand the book, right? So everybody understand how that works? All right. The English word servant translates 7 different Greek words, each of which had a slightly different shade of meaning for a servant. Our language, a later one, is unable to completely give the full meanings of the original biblical languages. We can't give the full meaning in English. You just can't get the full meaning. And that's not a grand conspiracy. That's not the work of Satan. That's just the way language works. When we're dealing with the Bible, we're dealing with words, and we're dealing with languages. And when it's translated, there's going to be some of that happens. Typically, you need to keep 2 things in mind when doing a word study. All right? 2 things you need to keep in mind. Number 1, word studies must be based on the original language. When doing a word study, you must keep in mind, what are you trying to figure out? What does the word mean in its original language? That's your ultimate goal. All right? What do you need to figure out? What does the word mean in its original language? That's the first thing you need to keep in mind. What do you think the second thing you need to keep in mind when doing a word study? You must allow the context to indicate the ultimate meaning of the word being studied, no matter what the English equivalent might be. So what's the first thing you need to keep in mind? Original language, original language, original language. What's the second thing you need to keep in mind? What the context does what? Indicates the ultimate meaning. Not the English, no matter what the English equivalent might be. No matter what the English equivalent might be. All right, everybody got that? So what's number 1? Original language. Number 2? Context determines the ultimate meaning, no matter what the English equivalent might be. Right? The English equivalent may be, it means this, but what does the context say? You cannot ignore context in word study. You can't just throw out, because here's what some people do. Well, the word means this. Yeah, but what does the context say? Oh, now now that's true. Like if I'm reading the King James and they use a word, well, the word vain. In our language, vain means conceited, arrogant, right? Okay, right. Okay, but it can be meaningless, but it carries a certain idea. All right, so I can't worry. In that case, I got to forget what we think about the word in English, and I got to go, okay, how did they use the word in English back then? But ultimately what I need to do, and that is an important thing to keep in mind, but ultimately what you need to do is what did it mean in the original? Because the original determines the meaning I give it in English. Does that make sense? All right, but so you understand context though, right? Okay, man, because here's what happens. Someone will say, man, they'll look up the definition of a word, say in the Strong's Concordance or something, and say, see, this is what the word means. Or they'll look up in the English dictionary, this is what the word means, and they'll create an entire doctrine. You're like, well, wait a minute. What does the context say? So context is very important, very important. Context, definition. Does that make some sense? All right, okay. Here we go. Now, what tools do you think you need to do a word study? Okay, here's... Okay, now this is very important. First of all, here's 2 tools that you do not use. I'm going to give you 3 tools you do not use to do a word study. You ready? 3 tools not to use. Tool number 1, do not, under any circumstance, use a paraphrase. What's a paraphrase? Give me some examples of Bibles that are paraphrases. The Message. That's a very famous one that was really popular in the 90s. Okay, lots of pastors were using it. They're using The Message. Other one? Okay, that's kind of. I think there was one called, I think it was called the Living Bible, I think was a paraphrase. I think. But The Message is probably the most common one. But just don't use a paraphrase. Don't use. Why can you not use a paraphrase? Well, they're not trying to give you the actual meaning. They're just paraphrasing it in a general way. In fact, what ultimately comes into paraphrases is what? It's not a translation, so you're automatically getting an interpretation. All right? Stay away from paraphrases, all right? You want Bibles that are actual translations. King James, okay? Some would argue the NIV sometimes veers off into some weird things, but it's not NIV is not a paraphrase. You get into translation arguments here, but translation, does that make sense? Don't use a paraphrase, okay? Just make sure you don't do that, all right? Some say that. Some say the ESV is, some say the King James, but those at least are attempts to be word for word. Usually the arguments between ESV, New American, King James, NIV becomes the method of translation. Like very word for word or trying to give an idea, dynamic equivalent versus not a dynamic equivalent. And so a dynamic equivalent is, okay, here's what the word means. Well, let's try to find a dynamic equivalent that captures the idea. Well, if you're capturing the idea, you're not giving me a word for word. Does that make sense? All right. But all of them use dynamic equivalent in some way, shape, or form. But we could get into a whole discussion. Just stay away from paraphrases, right? What's another thing you should not use? Commentary. Why not? Someone else is doing the work for you. Now, they may be right. They may be 100% right. But if you're going to do your own word study, don't go run to a commentary to go, do they give me the meaning of this word? Which is what people have a tendency to do. And that should lead me to the third thing you should not use. I'm going to say it. I say it in every method of Bible study. Don't use a study Bible. Don't use a study Bible. Don't use a study Bible. Okay? Now, Can you at some point go to a paraphrase? You could. At some point, can you go to a commentary? Absolutely. At some point, can you pull out a study Bible? Absolutely. But you don't do it in the initial study. What do you use those three things for? To see what other people have to say, right? You're like, well, wait a minute. Nobody agrees with me, okay? Okay, well, now you're dealing with the meaning of a word. If no one agrees with you, that's probably a bad sign, okay? Would you agree? Okay. All right. So don't use those three things, okay? What things do you need to use? A concordance would be number one. A concordance. Okay? Here's a concordance. You can use the old-fashioned concordance. Typically, Strong's is used, right? Okay? And the front part of it does what? If you look up a word, it shows you every place in the Bible where it is used. And what does the back of it do? Greek and Hebrew, right? And anyone can use it. I could hand it to one of these young people right here, and I could show within 5 minutes how to use it. Right? It's that simple, right? Anybody can use it, okay? But this is 1800s, old stuff, right? In the modern world, we don't even need to use this, right? You can go to the Blue Letter Bible. That's a great app to have on your phone, Blue Letter Bible. And what do? Okay, type in the word, right? Type in the word. It's going to show you the verses where it finds. Pick the verse, boom. Click the little number. It's going to bring interlinear up. Pick up the interlinear. It's going to show you all the words. Pick the word, hit it. It's going to tell you how to pronounce it in Greek or Hebrew. It's going to give you the definition, and it's going to show you every place that it used. I mean, you can do it within seconds. Okay. Yeah, it'll show you all the verses. It's going to give you everything. Everything. And you can hit the little speaker, and it'll read it to you in Greek and Hebrew, so you know exactly how to say it. I don't know what more you need, right? Yeah, it's pretty awesome. So you can, but use a concordance of some kind, right? What else do you need? Bible dictionary is always good to have. That's why there's one in almost all the pews. And what else? Sometimes a Bible encyclopedia is helpful. Bible dictionary, Bible encyclopedia. And then there's one other thing you need. English dictionary. Now, I know you're focused on the meaning of the word in Greek, but why would you need an English dictionary? Well, because you want to see how does this, the translators used an English word, right? And that English word has a meaning. So you're looking at the English word, and then you're going to look at the Greek and Hebrew and go, wait a minute, these two don't agree. And if they don't agree, then I got to step back from the English meaning and go, okay, when I read this, note to self, Webster's not right. Does that make sense? Okay, it's important to know that so you can see differences and changes and understanding that. All right, everybody got that so far? All right, now let's go through this. We've kind of talked about this. Let's look at 3 common difficulties in doing word studies. I've already hinted at these, but we'll go through these again. All right, 3 difficulties. Difficulty number 1. You ready? Sometimes several Greek words are translated by just one English word. Sometimes several Greek words are translated by just one English word. I gave you the example of servant. How many Greek words? 7. All right? Now that means a word study can turn into a major task, right? Hey, I'm going to do a word study on the word servant. Oh wait, there's 7 different Greek words. Oh no. Okay. Okay, I'm going to choose a different word. Okay, forget this one, all right? Because that's going to require a little bit of work. So far, so good. All right. So what's the first one? Several Greek words are translated by just one English word. All right. Second difficulty: sometimes one Greek or Hebrew word is translated several ways into English. You'll see this sometimes when you look on the Blue Letter app. or some of the other apps, it'll be like, here's the word, right? Here's the Greek word, and it'll say, also used as, and it'll give you like 5 different ways it's used. And you're like, wait a minute. Like koinonia. Koinonia is used as fellowship. It's used there's like 7 different ways it's used in the Bible. Okay, well that means it's that one Greek word is used a lot of different ways. Okay, right, exactly, right. Sometimes one Greek, sometimes the English word is servant, but it's 7 different Greek words, and sometimes that Greek, there can be 5 different Greek words, right, that are all used into one English word. All right, does that make sense? Okay, kind of makes sense. There are a lot of different variations of it, is what I'm trying to say. Yeah, here it is. The Greek word koinonia is translated 5 different ways in the King James. It's translated communication once, communion 4 times, contribution once, distribution once, and fellowship 12 times. Yeah, a lot of different meanings there. Same Greek word. All right. Okay, so does that make sense? Okay. Now, okay, I could try to tell you how to resolve that difficulty, but we won't do that right now. Just make sure you understand the difficulty. So you got those 2 difficulties, right? Third difficulty. Sometimes an original word is translated by a whole phrase in English. Sometimes you'll have one Greek word, but guess what? It doesn't get moved over word for word. They take the Greek word and turn it into a phrase. All right? Sometimes an original word is translated by a whole phrase in English. All right? Now this one causes you all kinds of problems. Why does this one cause so many problems? Because concordances do not list word translation by phrases. You will have to compare the recent versions of the Bible you are using to see how the various translations or translators have rendered the word. Right? For example, Paul declared to the Corinthians, "But we all with open face, beholding as in a glass the glory of the Lord, and are changed into the same image from glory to glory, even by the Spirit of the Lord." That's 2 Corinthians 3:18. The phrase, beholding as in a glass, is just one word in the original. All right? So that can create all kinds of problems. So just understand that sometimes you're like, wait a minute, I end up with a phrase. How did I get a phrase? Why? Well, because they were like, here's this word. What do we got to capture this idea, and guess what they have to do? Phrase. So sometimes one Greek word can turn into a phrase. Sometimes one Greek or one Hebrew word can be turned into multiple different English words. And sometimes multiple different English or multiple Greek or Hebrew words can turn into one English word. That creates the problems. Now, here's the thing. If we don't know this, right? If Stephen doesn't know this or I don't know this, then we can be sitting there arguing over the meaning of a verse, and we don't even realize that there's a host of issues here to deal with before we can even begin the argument. Does that make sense? All right. Here we go. With my what classes? No, not really. Yeah. This is more a Protestant issue. Catholics are not going to get so much into word studies too much. The church is going to determine the meaning. I don't really need to figure it out. This is a Protestant problem because we believe every word is from God, every word is inspired by God, and we believe that it's our job to understand every word, and that every word is how we come up with our understanding. For the Catholic, they just read it. What's the general meaning, and what does the church say? End of story. This is what we get for demanding that right. We demand the right, then we have the responsibility to do this. So, if you don't want the responsibility of doing it, there's an easy solution. Go become a Catholic. You don't have to worry about it anymore. Okay? But as a Protestant, you believe every word here is what? Inspired. And how do you understand meaning? Words. All right, so what are the steps that you do to do this? All right, are you ready? Here's step one. What do you think step one is? Choose a word. You got to choose a word to study. That's simple. Choose a word. Step one, choose a word. How can you choose a word? Well, there you go. You can choose the word just by your reading. If you remember this morning when we looked at vain, what passage did I take the word vain from? Yeah, remember? You have it in your notes? 1 Thessalonians. Yeah, let me find 1 Thessalonians. It all of a sudden it disappeared from my Bible. Okay, here we go. 1 Thessalonians chapter 3, verse 5. All right. 1 Thessalonians 3:5. For this cause, when I could no longer forbear, I sent to know your faith, lest by some means the tempter have tempted you, and our labor be in vain. Okay, well, that caught my attention this time reading that verse. I've read that verse a bazillion times, and that vain hit me because it brought up a lot of ideas. Hey, guess what? When I die, guess who's going to determine if what I did was in vain? You guys. Right? You're going to determine if I wasted my time as a pastor, or is it going to show something, right? I mean, isn't that what he's telling them? Hey, I'm trying to get a report on your faith. If it doesn't look so good, I wasted a lot of time in Thessalonica, right? Well, I hope I didn't waste a lot of time in Ovalla, okay, right? So that caught my attention. But then I'm like, well, vain, huh? Well, what else could I do that could be in vain? And so then that got me to studying the word. There's a lot of different ways you can come across a word, but when you see a word, that means it's time to, especially if you see a word you don't truly understand. And I would argue, the verses where you see a word that you think you know are probably the words that you should do a word study on more than the ones you don't know, because it's possibly the ones you do know that you think you know that you have actually a wrong understanding of. Sometimes it's the words that you're like, oh, I got this. That's usually that tells you to do what? You don't have it. So go do what? Go study. All right. So number one, choose the word. Everybody got that? All right. What do you think number two is? What's step two? Define it how? Look it up in an English dictionary and write out the definition of the English word. Write out the definition of the English word. Now, this sometimes confuses people because this could be actually a separate step. So how you write this down in your notes, you can make this a separate step if you want. But use an English dictionary, write out the definition of the English word, and list with the definition synonyms and antonyms of the word. Now you can make that separate, the antonyms and synonyms, or you can put it with the definition. What do we mean by antonyms and synonyms? Okay? Let's go with this. Antonym is a what? The opposite, right? Synonym? Similar or same, right? Okay. Now, why do you want the opposite? It can bring into focus the strength or power of the word when you see it in contrast with that which is opposite. Does that make sense? You can sometimes you can look up an a dictionary of antonyms or synonyms. You can look it up that way. Thesaurus can do it. Yeah, a lot of different ways to find them. They're not hard. I mean, you can do it a Google search. Antonym for vain. I get you'll find them. There's lots of different ways of looking them up. But the main thing is the antonyms and the synonyms is not. I don't know if it's as important as just make sure you have the English definition. Make sure you know what that word means in English. Right? Because there's a couple of things. You may discover that your understanding of the word is not even the English meaning, right? Okay. Or you may go, yeah, that's definitely how I understand it. And then when you get ready to go to the Greek and Hebrew, you may realize, wow, we've all been wrong for a very long time. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. So use the English, find the English definition. That's step number 2. Right? Step number 3. Okay? Do I want to do... I'm going to go with step number 3 as it is. Sometimes I change these methods up every time I teach them because there's lots of different ways to do variations. Some don't like step 3, but I think step 3 is important. You'll see why. For step 3, guess what you do? Take the verse, right? Okay, that has the word. Well, okay, we're going to change this up. Okay, step 2, we got the English definition. Okay, we're going to change this up. Here's what we're going to do in step 3. You ready? Ready for step 3? Okay, step 3. This is what we're going to do. For step 3, we are going to make a list of every verse that uses the word. Right? I'm completely changing this method completely up. That's okay. Make a list of every verse that uses the word. Now, you can accomplish that how? A concordance. Very simple, right? Very simple. Okay? That's very simple. Oh, whoa. We did have a lot of different numbers. Okay. Right. So yeah. Well, yeah. I'd have to look at the device to figure out what it was doing or why. What it was including. Sometimes you'll have to mess with it, but the main thing is get a concordance and get at least an idea of all the verses. Now, for me, I have like on my iPad, I had it copied down all the verses. I hadn't counted to know exactly how many. But I probably could have given a number. But just make sure you have. Okay. Let's say the word is vain or the word is propitiation. Right? Okay, propitiation. I need to write down every verse where the word propitiation is used. Got it? All right? Okay. Now, at this point, you're not looking up the Greek. You're not looking up Hebrew. You just want to know where it is used. Okay? Got that? All right. So, step 1, choose a word. Step 2, English definition. Step 3, make a list. Make a list. All right? You got that? Now, step 4. You ready? Write down a general summary of how the verse is used in each one and every place that it is found. So in other words, you have your list, right? Say the first place is Romans 3, right? Okay, Romans 3, how is the word used? Just summarize it. You're not trying to go crazy interpretation. You're summarizing how the word is used, right? Very simple. You're not trying to answer all the problems. You're not trying to interpret the word. Just a basic summary of how the word is used. For example, 1 Thessalonians 3:5. Vain. How is Paul using the word vain in 1 Thessalonians 3:5? Well, no, you're trying to give me the meaning. Just give me a summary of how he's using it. What is he concerned about? That his labor is going to be in vain. You may not know what the word means yet. Again, you're not trying to interpret the word yet. You're trying to just summarize how it's used. Paul is concerned that his labor is going to be in vain if the people have succumbed to the tempter. That's a summary. Does that make sense? Your summary. Why am I going for a summary and not an interpretation? Because this focuses on your observation. Because here's you go. And you're getting a little bit of the context in as well. You're observing how it's being used, right? After, let's say you look up, how many did we say vain was used? We had different numbers. Let's say 35. If you look at 35 times and you get a general way how it's used, by the time you're done, are you going to have a pretty good idea how the word is used? No matter who comes and argues with you, right? No matter who comes along and tries to argue, you're going to say, wait a minute, 35 times. For example, if we look up every reference where the word baptism is used, Every time baptism is used. You don't know that the word is baptizo. You don't know anything about the Greek. You don't know what it means. When you're done looking at every time someone is baptized, what's going to be your general idea? I'm going to have some general ideas. They believe, they're baptized. Would you agree that that's almost the case in every situation, other than the households, but we could assume that they believed and were baptized, right? What else do we seem to get? They go down into water. They can only be baptized if there is much water. Now, I don't know what baptizo means yet, right? I don't even know that that's the Greek word. But guess what you've just seen? You've got some observation. So as you go into the word study, if there's some debate, you're not going to be misled. Right? Remember that's what we did with Israel? Hey, well, Israel can mean this, Israel can mean that. When we got done looking at every use of the word Israel, who cares what everyone said? We observed every case. Right? Now, the typical books that teach how to do a word study does not have what I just said as a step. But it has to be a step. Because sometimes what happens when you get into word study, you get into a major... You've heard it before. You'll have one pastor say, well, everyone believes this, but in the Greek, it means this. And then they say that all those other people are wrong in their interpretation. And then you'll have someone else say, well, no, I don't think it means that in Greek. You'll get into an argument about baptizo. Most will say it means to immerse. Others will say, well, it just means to make wet. Now you get it. Now, who's here an expert on Greek? So then guess what you do? You rely on the people that agree with you. That's not doing a word study. But guess what? If you observe every passage and you write down a summary, again, when you write down a summary, are you trying to interpret what the word means? No, you're just saying, this is what I see in the passage. Just basic observation. They went down into the water. Now that doesn't tell you what the word means, but that gives you an indication of what happened. They believed and were baptized. What else are you going to see by the end? I don't see any babies being baptized. All right, that's getting me. Right now, who cares what the meaning is? You've just done a word study. So I want to make sure you get that. So step 1, choose the word. Step 2, English definition. Step 3, summarize how the word is used in every verse. Okay, right? Okay. What was? I'm sorry. Did I have a different? List every verse. Okay, list every verse. And then 4, summarize how the word is used in every verse. Okay, good. Thanks for clarifying that. I'm trying to combine 3 and 4. Okay. All right. Everybody got that? All right. Now we'll put number 5. Now this is where the books usually add this step, but I moved it to 5. They usually have it like at number 3 or number 2. Okay. Number 5. You ready? All of those verses that in your list, go back and read all of those verses in a different translation. Best place to do this? BibleHub.com. BibleHub.com. You can access it on your mobile device. Guess what happens when you go to BibleHub.com and you put in 1 Thessalonians 3, verse 5? Guess what happens? It's going to give you like 15 translations of 1 Thessalonians 3, 5. I don't know if it gives you all the different English translations. I don't think it does. It shows you every place that the word is used in the Bible, but I don't think it does. It may. Different translations? Okay. Okay, different Bibles. Okay. Well, and Bible Hub, what we'll do, it'll just list them right there on one page. Boom. Yeah, the other one you can select each version, but on Bible Hub it just shows them all on one page. All of them. So you have a comparison. Now, why do you want to see how every translation uses the word? And you're going from, remember your list. You got that list of every place the word is used. Why do you want to read different translations for every verse that you have listed? Because it's going to show you how the different translators are handling the word. Because guess what happens? The NIV didn't even use propitiation. Okay, figures. Didn't even use propitiation. Okay, I think they used atonement. I think that's kind of a different word in a roundabout. Like I think we can make an argument that that's kind of like that's atonement. Well, we got it. That's. Or they may use a phrase, right? They may use a phrase, but you get the idea. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, why is this critical? Why is this critical in your word study? This indicates why there can be disagreement, right? If the NIV is using one word and you're using the King James, you're using a different word, you could be arguing over a verse and it's because of different use of the word. But here, what could possibly clarify that? Your observation may say, I don't care how your translation handled it. 227 times, this is the idea. Your translation's giving me a different idea, but the general use of the word, that's why now you're going to have an idea. You're going to already know the controversy probably before you even get into the controversy. All right? So what was step 1 again? Choose the word. Step 2? English definition. All right? With synonyms and antonyms if you can. Number 3? List every verse where the word is used. Number 4? Read every verse and give a general summary. Do not interpret the word. You're going to be so tempted to do so. Don't do that. You're just a general observation how the word is used. And then next, read every verse in your list in a different translation. As many translations as you can. Right? Now, if you've read, just do this because, and guess what you're going to write down? Whoa, there's massive disagreement on how this word. King James is using this word. These others don't even use the same word. And it doesn't even mean the same thing. Right? Now you know there's a problem, right? Now you're going to have to dig a little deeper. All right? Everybody got that one? Okay. Now, then guess what you do? Guess what the next step is? I'm trying to hurry. I want to try to finish this. What do you think the next step is? What step have we left out yet? What do you have so far in your word study? You got a lot of observation. What do you still don't know? The meaning of the original word. You still have no clue. So now you got to look up the meaning in the original language. So if it's an Old Testament word, what are you looking up? Hebrew. If it's in the New Testament, you're looking up the Greek. Concordance will help you, yeah. Concordance is going to give you the number. If we're using a paper concordance, it's going to give you the number, and then you flip to the back and look up that number, and it's going to give you the meaning in the Hebrew or the Greek. All right? Now, when you look this up, what do you need to determine? All right? Well, here's what we're going to do. To write down the definition, you've got to write down the definition of every Greek and every Hebrew word that is translated, whatever the English word is you're looking up. Does that make sense? For example, if I start going through, if I look up the word vain, right, and I find out, wait a minute, there's like 5 Greek words translated vain, then I've got to do what? I got to write down the definition, and this is where it'll get confusing, right? And stay with me. Guess what I'm going to have to do? All right, vain, used in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, uses this Greek word. Now, sometimes it'll use different Greek words in the same book, right? So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to have to compile a new list, right? These verses use this Greek word. This Greek word means this. These verses use this Greek word. This Greek word means this. So when you go to the original language to get the definition, what do you really have to do? Determine, this is what you're determining, not only the meaning, but how many Greek or Hebrew words were used and what is the meaning of each. Does that make sense? That may seem a little confusing, but you understand what I'm saying there. Now, it doesn't always work that way, right? If I look up the Greek word, if I look up the English word baptism, right, and I look up the Greek, there's only, I think, 1 or 2. Baptizo, I think there's a variation of it, but it's pretty much the same. That's going to be simple. But in sometimes, I think with vain, I think there was multiple Greek words. Yeah, love, yes. The arguments, there's three main ones in the Greek. I don't know about the Hebrew, but you get the idea. So, let's summarize this step again. You look up the meaning of the original, and what do you need to determine when you look up the meaning of the original? How many different Greek words or Hebrew words there are, and the meaning for each. All right, we're going to run out of time, okay? All right. There's a lot more steps here we could get into, but I'm not going to be able to get to them all. This will get you pretty close, okay? So what do you have so far on your paper if you were doing a word study method? Let's go through this. You got the word you chose. So that's at the top of your page, whatever the word is, right? Say propitiation. Got it. Everybody got it? Second thing you have, English definition, possibly synonyms and antonyms. That's easy. You can knock that out in like 2 or 3 minutes. Third step, list every verse. That's simple because you just look it up in an electronic version and go, here they are. Got it down. Done. Right? Man, you're like, I'm making progress. Right? Fourth step is where it gets complicated, right? Now what do you got to do? Go back and read each one and write down a general observation and summary. What are you not doing? You're not interpreting the word. Do not interpret the word. Don't even look up the interpretation of the word. Just simply write down, this is how the word is used. Make it as simple as possible, like 1 or 2 sentences. The less you can write, the better, right? Because you don't want to turn it into because if you're not careful, you're going to slide over into interpretation. You just want observation. Right? Everybody got that? Then what do you do next? Read it in many translations as possible. So here's what you do. Okay, you remember you've got the list. You've got it. You've read it. You've given an observation. And then guess what you write? An observation based off you write down which translation. NIV, observation, how it's used. If it's the same, what do you write? Same. If it's completely used differently, write down, summarize how it's used differently. Well, the NIV uses it this way. The King James seems to use it this way. And why is that going to help? That's going to start helping you understand if there's what? Disagreement or confusion. And then what do you do next? Look up the original. And what are you going to have on your paper when you look up the original? Okay. You're going to identify how many different Greek words or Hebrew words there are. There may only be one, right? If there's one, it's simple. If there's multiple ones, then do what? You got to combine the references. Here are the references who use this Greek word, and here is the definition. Here are the references that use this Greek word. Here is the definition. Right? Great. All right. And I'll stop right there. We could go to another step, but you get the idea. Right? We could get a pretty good idea. How far would that get you? It's going to get you pretty close. That's going to get you pretty close. And how quickly could you pull this off? Well, first, depends on how many times the word is used. Right? Okay. What's going to be the longest part here? The general summary. And nobody tells you to do that. Almost all the books are going to ignore that. But I think if you ignore that, you're cheating yourself. Because if you know how it's observed, guess what you've done? You've protected yourself. How many times you hear a sermon going, well, a lot of people think this, but this is what it means in the Greek and the Hebrew. And they say that. And in many cases, they know that one, the average person is not going to what? Go look it up, right? And number 2, they sound really smart. Okay? But number 3, they're leading you to an interpretation. Guess what you're protected from? If you've looked up how that word is used everywhere in the Bible and you've already done a general summary, they can't lie to you. They can't lie to you. I don't know how many times I've heard sermons about infant baptism. Well, the word sometimes uses to refer to washings. Well, it may be. It's used in Acts, I think, refer to them washing the table. Well, congratulations, that's great. Has nothing to do with baptism. That just means the word is used. I'm not going to draw my understanding from baptism from a passage that talks about washing tables. How should I draw my understanding about baptism? On the verses that speak about baptism. And whether I know what the Greek word is or not, guess what I can determine by reading all the passages? They go down into water. Right. I'm going to just draw some... I don't have to be a Bible scholar to figure that out. All the smart people may mock us and think we're dumb, but if I'm dumb because I mean, that's just general understanding. You can write entire doctrinal thesis on the meaning of baptizo, and does it allow for sprinkling? You can make that argument all day, and maybe the Greek word allows for sprinkling, but guess what? The way it's used in the Bible... And they can say, well, it's used in Acts to talk about washing a table. Clearly, they didn't dunk the whole table. I don't care what they did with the table. Okay, because that has nothing to do with it. Every time a person was baptized, they went down into water. Why did they need to be much water? Why, when he was in the chariot, the Ethiopian eunuch? Okay, why did he need to go down into the water? Why couldn't they just grab some water from the chariot? I mean, I'm assuming they're traveling through the desert. Someone had water on the chariot and just sprinkled 3 times. Okay, yeah. See, why? I think the Gospels talk about John the Baptist was baptizing there because there was much water. Why did he need a lot of water? Why did he go into the Jordan? Right? I mean, that's giving me an implication, right? Does that make sense? So doing that step, I know it's not the normal step in word study, but I think it may be more important than all the other steps because no one can come back and mislead you. Nobody can play any games with you. You're like, no, that word is used 32 times. I read all 32 verses, and my observation of 32 times is this. They're like, well, you don't know Greek or Hebrew. I don't. But the people writing the Bible knew Greek and Hebrew, and this is how they used it 32 times. So I don't care what you tell me. Yeah. House of Israel, house of Judah. Well, that doesn't mean Israel. That means the church. Well, every time the word house of Israel and house of Judah is used, yeah, right. And again, well, that's not even an argument about Hebrew or Greek. That's just someone just telling you that's what it means. But when we looked at it, it doesn't work anymore. Does that make sense? So that observation is the most important step, and that's never taught in typical word studies. They don't teach you to do that. They're going to just teach you, argue about what it means in the Greek and the Hebrew. And I think we should argue about what it means in the Greek and the Hebrew. But the people who wrote in Greek and Hebrew, if they used it 32 times and they used it a certain way, then they truly believed that that word can be used that way. And if that's the way they typically used it, then that's what I'm going to go down to. Does that make sense? All right, I'll have to stop right there. That's a lot of information. We didn't get to really complete the whole actually how to do a word study, but I've given you the best. That's the best example I could give you. And you can do it anytime. You could, and again, the more you learn these methods, you can modify them whenever you want. You can just use a little bit of that, because what's very much connected to a word study is a topical study. And that's a whole different method, but you can merge those two into one. Right? So, all right, let's pray. Lord God, we come before you this evening. You've given us your word, and in your word are words. And I pray that we now understand a little bit better in how to actually study the words. And maybe the most important lesson we've learned from this tonight is how to protect ourselves from people who claim to possess a knowledge about those words that we do not have. And whenever they make that claim, they basically act like we are to simply submit to them. I pray that this step in observing your word and how it's used will help us be protected from those who may try to manipulate or try to intimidate us based off their knowledge. I pray that we would really use this and help other people see how to do this as well, so that they can be protected as well. We ask this in Jesus' name. And God's people said,